All right, well, welcome everybody. Another episode of Coffee with Korey and Jeff, and we've had a pretty fun topic going on, and it's one that I think is timely and definitely has been good content, I think, so far. So we've been talking about demystifying your digital marketing. Lots of misconceptions, lots of ways to do it wrong, unfortunately, lots of ways to burn money, and so it's been a good topic, and so far getting good feedback on that. So today, this is the third part of the series, of a 4-part series, and today we wanted to talk about really how to build your digital marketing strategy, right? Yep. So we talked about some of the misconceptions with SEO and really around SEM and search marketing itself, and I think what we discovered in that is that it's complicated.
Very, yeah.
So we want to touch on just really how to build a strategy around digital marketing, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of ways to burn money, but it can also be a really effective, highly efficient way to get leads if it's done well. So we're going to talk through that today. So Korey, let's just start with kind of an overview of like, when we talk with clients, where do we start when we talk about the digital marketing strategy?
Yeah, well, I think a good way to kind of get into this conversation again is refreshing the memories of all of us on what are the 3 main components. So we've got intent, which is those users or prospects that are searching having intended searches for treatments and services that are offered.
Right.
Second would be what we call top of mind or awareness advertising, which is typically display, the visual advertising that you see on Facebook, Instagram, sometimes LinkedIn.
Staying in their face, right?
Yep. And then the kind of hybrid in the middle, which is remarketing, which is kind of using the power of both. So those are the channels or the methodologies behind the channels.
Right. So let's just stop right there, because that is, it's kind of like there's a multiplying effect to each one of those, because it's not just the types or the methodologies, but it's also then you spread each of those methodologies over platforms.
Yep.
So top of mind, intent,
they all intertwine together.
Google, top of mind, intent, remarketing, Facebook, top of mind, intent, remarketing, Instagram, LinkedIn, on and on and on. Yep. So it gets complicated really quick.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you just described in a really good way the messaging component within those channels. And so, again, you can hit those channels with awareness or a direct call to action, which would be, take the demo now, or, sign up now, or get $50 off, or whatever that direct call to action is.
Yep.
Or it might be a more what we call top of funnel, which would be something like download the paper to learn more about this particular service, etc. So there's different ways that we use those channels.
Yeah.
And that's all what makes up the strategy. But what I think really it comes down to, like, project number 1 for building the strategy is budget.
Yeah.
In the simplest, easiest way that we talk about this is, if you have $500 a month to spend versus $500,000 a month to spend, a marketer should be able to make the wisest decision for that money that they can. And again, we've said in the prior meeting or prior videos, the job of a marketer is really lowest cost, highest impressions, most targetability, best chance of conversion. Well, you got $500 to spend. We're going to recommend a different process or different set of channels and messaging than if you have $500,000.
Sure. Okay, so really quick. So for all of our healthcare practices and dental practices out there, does that look any different in that environment? I mean, what do we typically recommend? Is there a recommended percentage for our providers out there that makes more sense? Because you might say, well, if you're in a highly commoditized environment, you may need to have a higher budget, right? Like big spend, Geico. If you're selling, like insurance, you got to have a pretty big budget.
So
when we talk to our practices, where do we usually start with budget?
Well, with budget, the easiest way to determine how to figure out that budget is there's a pretty simple formula that we've come up with that is really based on what the big companies do. So it's just taking principles of a bigger Fortune 500 or above company and how they look at this, and applying it to the businesses that we work with. So you start with your gross production, and again, notice for because we're dealing with healthcare, there's a collection component here. Write-offs, insurance, etc. That's not how we look at this. We look at the production number, the gross production number.
Gross revenue.
Yeah, we're dealing with the top line when we talk about marketing.
Yep.
So that gross top number is where we derive the first part of the formula. We look at, in this example, we'll say, let's look at year to date last year, gross production. Then let's look at where we want to be in 12 months. And then you can factor your increases that you're hoping to be at. Then we take that gross production that we want to be at, and that's where we derive what I like to call the CBR, or cash burn rate. What a cash burn rate is the threshold of money you're willing to invest in your marketing strategy that will not be something that you're painfully writing the check each month, because you know that you're going to have to burn cash in order to invest in the growth that you're looking for. We don't have a crystal ball, as we've talked about. So we have to build this formulaically. And the only way to build this formulaically is to understand where are we going, and then how are we going to get there, and what's the cost that's going to be involved in doing that.
Right. Okay, so really the strategy or the method that we're looking at is visualizing, if you will, who you want to be as a practice, and spending to be there.
Exactly.
Right? So, we know practices, you're typically going to lose. Again, it depends on the particular sector, but you're going to lose 15 to 20% of your patients every year in churn, right?
People die, people move, people do get upset occasionally.
Maybe, we're not perfect.
No.
And so people move on. And so considering where you want to be, but also the churn loss, just to hold your ground. Right?
It's funny, just on that note, I was just talking to a client yesterday, and she was really, really, picking up what I was throwing down. We were really having a great dialogue. But one thing she said is, well, I really don't need to grow. Like, I'm really, really busy. And I chuckled and I said, well, that's kind of a dangerous mindset.
Right.
I said, you may not need to grow, but you don't need to shrink either. And you're going to shrink whether you want to or not. So part of marketing should just be an always on, always cost of doing business, because what you're doing, if nothing else, is continuing to overcome churn.
So if you're 1,000 patient practice, you got 1,000 active patients, you might not want to grow, but you better go find 150 new patients a year, or just really to break even. And that's not true for everybody. I mean, some people, it's different in your competitive environment, in your city, wherever. But for a lot of practices, you got to go find some new prospects, maybe up to 100, just to hold your ground, or you're shrinking. So I want to make sure we stay on building a digital marketing strategy, right? So I kind of took us off course a little bit with, but you started to say that, checkbox number one is really to start with budget. Where else do we go with recommending or building a digital marketing strategy?
Okay, well, let's finish that thought, because I realized I didn't really get to what is the budget?
Okay, yep.
So the gross production, you take 3% of gross production would be what we call a very low risk CBR. Like, if you're not willing to spend 3% a year, probably don't belong in the marketing game.
Right.
It's just enough to really help you overcome churn and stay top of mind. 5% of gross is a good, healthy number, and neither of those numbers, if you asked your accountant or somebody you trust with books and numbers, they said, hey, Jeff, how much money do you spend on marketing? And you said 5% of gross. They'd say, oh, good for you. Now you get up if you're a startup, you might be as much as 10-15% of desired gross because you've got nothing to start with, etc.
Yep.
So and then you have to factor in other things that are not rocket science, but a consideration, which is what does your market look like? What's the demographics? Are you in a saturated market? Are you in a rural market? I love marketing for rural markets. Those are easy.
Yeah.
So it just depends on those factors. But generally 3 to 5% of gross production is a good place to start.
Okay. 3% is kind of the shallow end. You want to be there. You're not maybe you've got some other types of strategies going. They have limited budget, but really that being kind of the minimum entry point, right? Yeah. If you're gonna play in the digital space, you need to have at least 3% of gross revenue to even really get in the game.
Yep.
5% would be better on a.
Yeah. Once you get up into 15%, the accountant might be going, where are you being? Can you demonstrate ROI on that? Yeah. They might get a little nervous. So 5% is a really good, healthy middle ground.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Okay. Thanks for circling back on that. Yeah. That number is important. Yeah. So checkbox number 2, we're building a digital marketing strategy. How do I go about it? We mentioned early the complexities of where in the world do I start?
Yeah.
How do I play this chess game? I've got my 5%. I'm ready to put some money down. What's my next move? Yeah. What do I do?
Well, the next move is do not ask your buddy what works for him or her. Don't do that.
Yep.
Because what works for him or her, if you just heard the first part of this, it's their strategy should be based on their budget and their plan and their market.
Right.
So stay within your own house and build your own house. So the next thing we do is we look at, okay, well, now we've got these channels. We talked a little bit about these channels. Digital marketing really isn't that complicated by channel because in healthcare, we're not going to be on TikTok. I guess maybe if you're a pediatric dentist, maybe, and that's a big maybe.
Yeah.
So, because you're still looking for the moms, right?
The buyers are probably not there.
Yeah. So the reality is there's Facebook, Instagram, Google, pay-per-click, and then local advertising within your geographic radius. So the channels generally aren't that complicated, and I personally don't think that sweating that is a big deal, because if you work with anybody who's worth their salt in marketing, they'll be able to tell you, look, these are where the ducks are flying. This is where your market is.
Yep.
So there's an audience there. But you would then take those channels, and where it gets complicated, as you pointed out, is now what amount of budget do I apply to what channels, and how do I optimize those channels, and how does all of that we'll call it the triad, Facebook, display, Facebook remarketing, and Google intent pay-per-click.
Yep.
How does that triad work together to be most maximized? Well, some of that is there's strategies and thought and history that you work from. So like in our business, we've been doing this for a lot of years. So we would take from what we know and apply that. But in most cases, even with what we know, we still need time to optimize that strategy. So sometimes your strategy will move and adjust and flex based on variables that are out of our control in marketing. I can't tell you that COVID was going to come on. I didn't know COVID was going to come on, right?
Yep.
But COVID had obviously a major impact on marketing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you stop marketing. It means you analyze and adjust.
Yeah. During COVID, you may have had less call to action, less intent-based stuff and more awareness, education, top of mind type stuff. So when the lights went back on, you were top of mind for those people looking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we could go on for 2 hours on how to maximize these channels, but the general premise is each channel has its advantages. Top of mind is obviously what it implies. We're at the top of the decision-making funnel for that person who's looking at the ad. They didn't have a necessary, desire to go have treatment, but your ad caught their attention. So that's going to be harder to convert and show ROI on that type of ad because it isn't really designed for that. It's designed for awareness. So your budget that's applied to that has to be factored into the conversion of that. So this is where we talk about multi-channel attribution. And we'll get into that in the last one, which is how do you measure all this stuff?
Yep.
right?
Yep. Important.
So we typically apply this is very, very rough because it depends on a bunch of variables, but we typically apply about a 70-30 budget split. 70% on intent, 30% on intent and top of mind.
Yep.
And that is just a general rule of thumb. That is no rule of law. There's other factors that go into it.
30% on remarketing and top of mind?
Yes, sorry.
I said intent twice, but...
I'm sorry. That's why I'm not...
half of 30, 50. That's actually 85%. No, I'm just kidding.
That's why I'm not the... that's why you're the operations guy.
70, 30, and 10. Wait.
Thank you for clarifying for our audience.
Yeah. Okay, so that's super helpful. I was actually going to ask that. Like, if we were to go for, the average practice in an average town, like how do we normally spread the chips, right? So that's very helpful. And so if it's 70% intent, how about platform wise? How do we spread between, if we're doing intent on Google, intent on Facebook, how do we typically have a recommendation for Google, Facebook, Instagram spend?
Google's always gonna, this is good for Google. Google's always gonna be historically where we spend the majority of the money.
For intent.
Okay. Because it's obvious. Dentist near me, chiropractic near me, back pain solution near me, etc. By the way, you don't even have to type in near me. All of those
Google knows that.
All those queries know that you're looking
Google's
for.
Really smart.
Yeah, they're really smart.
Yeah.
It's really smart. Whatever.
Yeah.
So almost always the intention or the money's going to be spent where there's intent.
Yeah.
Now, this is where the strategy has to be flexible, though, is after 60 to 90 days, which is about what it takes to optimize, we might find out that the client wants to focus on sciatica or scoliosis. I don't know, something that is a treatment that they're really, really passionate about. But for whatever reason, there's not enough traffic for that particular keyword set. So it isn't necessarily that we just go throw money at something and it works.
Yeah.
There's times where a client says, I really am passionate about, correcting people's bite. Okay. So I want to talk about functional dentistry. Well, nobody types that in. So, we may have to kind of come around the back door and really reach the more, dentist near me keyword because they don't even know to type in that they have a bite problem. So a lot of it has to be optimized, which is why marketing isn't a crystal ball. We have to look at what's coming in and then make adjustments accordingly.
Yeah. Okay. So step one is set your budget.
Yep.
Right. We talked about that. Step two is getting a roadmap for the lay of the land, right? Yep. Like setting your intent and your remarketing and across the channels. Typically we talk 70-30, all that. So when we're working through this, and obviously the kind of the ongoing maintenance of that, right? You're looking for negative keywords and optimizing ads and making sure, you might be getting the wrong kind of leads or something like that, or leads are not geographically correct, or just the wrong kind of interest. You're tooling and tweaking, right? So, okay, what's the next part of building a really good digital marketing strategy?
Message.
Okay, let's talk through that.
Hands down message.
What talk it through. What's a good message? Why is obviously message is important, but let's talk that out.
Yeah. Well, number one, healthcare in general is considered a parity service. Being general, obviously. The more specific your specialty, the less parity you are. But if we just talk about general dentistry, the average patient doesn't know how to differentiate one dentist over the other.
You do physical therapy and you do physical therapy.
Yeah. Great.
How do I make a decision?
You're both pretty good, I'm assuming. You both went to good schools. That doesn't tell me much. So that's where message comes in. So, and this is really up to the customer primarily, but they have to understand what is their value proposition. What is it that they, you and I, when we built our business, we really revolved around the book Good to Great. What is your hedgehog principle? What are you best at? What are you passionate about? And what can you make money at? And what do people want? Those are the things that you want to identify. So let's just say, because we don't have a lot of time, let's just say that the intention that you want to go after, or the treatment you want to go after, is to solve sciatica pain or something like to that effect. Well, you then would use that as your lead in and identify the channels that we've identified that you're going to use. And the keyword strategy for Google intent is it's very simple in theory. But what's not simple is what kind of ad, because you only have so many characters, what kind of ad is going to draw that person to click through the ad, and then what are they going to see on the other side that's going to inspire them to take the next step, which is to book the appointment. So that's why message, and again, we could have a 2-hour vlog just on message alone.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but generally intent is more straightforward. It's more, let's go ahead and book now. So the message and content should be more aimed at, let's just get you in the door. Let's get you booked with an appointment. Facebook is more top of mind, or Instagram, because again, it's awareness driven. So you might be more educational in your message.
Download an ebook or find out more about our practice or whatever.
And your goal is always, with top of mind, is to move them down to an actionable state. So you can't just drop them an ebook and then be done. There has to be a process to say, okay, now that you drop the ebook, what do we do next? And so again, strategy is budget, channels, content, and then executing, and you used a good term, and unfortunately it's not coming to mind, but basically moving those levers, adjusting and refining, because marketing is not a perfect science. If it was, I wouldn't have a job, and marketing would be fairly rudimentary. It'd be like, follow the plan and you're done. And then the last thing that we need to remember is ads need to be optimized in what they say and then what they connect to, because Google, Facebook, all of these channels, they know that ultimately even their ads have to be optimized. Your ads have to be optimized, because they don't want users searching for things that are irrelevant, because they'll stop using the platforms and then they can't sell ads. So if you put out an ad that's trickery, and you try to launch somebody over to something that isn't relevant, Google will just basically charge you through the nose, or not even serve up your ad.
So, example of that. Let's just for our listeners, talk that through. So you're running an ad on, say, implants or fixing sciatica. You click on that ad and you land on a page for, something general about your practice, or you're trying to sell them a tool or a toothbrush, and Google is looking at that going, this isn't what the user intended.
Exactly, and it's very technical. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but it's all the way down to what is the website URL address, and what is the extension on that URL address. What are the keywords associated with that? I mean, there's all sorts of technical stuff that oftentimes people don't realize. Like, why do I pay a marketing group at all? Why can't I just put my ads up? Well, these are some of the reasons why you don't just do it on your own. Because it's a full-time gig.
There's a relationship there that needs to be right between your ad and that journey that the user is following. The search to the ad to the content and the message they ultimately land on needs to be cohesive, and it needs to be right. Or Google is like, hey, we don't want to serve this ad up. It's not a good experience for our users, right?
And their algorithms that they use to evaluate that are, as we know, they get more and more sophisticated every day.
So message is huge. We got it's a big deal, and certainly within message is that quality of content that maybe Google even doesn't care as much about, but your eyeballs do. The user wants to see good, clean quality, a nice representation of the brand, nicely displayed, is aesthetically appealing, inspires emotion, right? So getting it right all the way down to the content that makes someone want to move ahead. Good copywriting, a good brand, things like that.
Well, just to that point, I mean, you and I had some fun a couple of weeks ago with this tool that we have where it evaluates basically where it's a heat map, and it shows where people are searching on the website, where their traffic patterns are, and it shows where the hot spots are in your website, literally by following eye movement and click movement. Crazy stuff. Well, bottom line is, as you know, when we did that evaluation, we changed the button from something like book a demo to, I don't know, try a demo or something minor, and then we changed it from like blue to the button from blue to orange, and our uptick in click-throughs was like through the roof. So it's And I could have never predicted that.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is polishing, evaluating, and adjusting. And that's why it's really hard when we think about advertising, we expect this one-to-one result.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding the platforms, understanding the audience, and aligning those over time and adjusting. And then once you have something that works, don't stop.
We always say, you get something that works, you double down.
Yeah.
Right? Like you
Spend
move your
more.
chips into that. So content's huge. It's a really big deal because that's the last piece of the journey. Is you can get a lot of things right.
Yep.
And you can spend a lot of money, and then they land on your site that looks like it was built in the 90s, and then they pull the ripcord, they're out, right? And now you've lost that potential lead.
Might as well throw your money into a tornado and watch it blow away, because it's not really going to help.
Yeah, so. And there's really no point in that process that you really can just be apathetic about or get wrong. It's got to be soup to nuts. It needs to be a dialed process and a dialed experience, so that they finally make that decision to click or call or give you their info. That's the moment, right? And then of course, you can have a great digital marketing strategy, and then when they make contact, you better be ready.
Never pick up the phone or blah blah
you don't
blah.
pick up the phone,
That's a whole nother
messages,
whole nother
or you don't have a system in place to follow up and drip out good information. But okay, super good stuff. Definitely not child's play. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's definitely you want to be out in the digital world, right? I mean, this is where the ducks are flying. This is the yellow pages of the 80s. It's like, if you're just not there, you're just not going to get found. So you just, it's not a choice. You have to be there, but it's got to be right. It's got to be well built. It needs to be cohesive, or you're just going to burn a lot of money. That 3% will go like that, and then what you'll say is it doesn't work.
Yep.
Right? We hear that often. It doesn't work.
Talk about in the next one.
Yep. So really good stuff. I hope that was helpful on at least a good starting place for building your digital strategy. Budget to all the way over to content. And so we look forward to seeing you next time in the next episode. And have a great day.
Thanks.